Carlson is back in Moscow again for another interview. Now, I think if you were following me back when he interviewed Vladimir Putin, you know how big of a deal that was at that point in time. An American journalist going to Russia to interview Vladimir Putin, which was a crazy big deal. Obviously, corporate media was against it. Of course, a lot of politicians were against it, and they said, you're talking to the enemy, right? I've continued to tell you on the show, Russia is not our enemy, right? We have to stop calling these countries like Russia and China our enemy and move away from that. There was a lot that people learned from that interview. But now he is back in Moscow again. And this brings up a question, and this is something that we all need to ask because we're going to do a comparison. We need to know, why is it that Tucker Carlson is able to travel to Russia, interview Vladimir Putin, and now he's interviewing, I'll show you in just a second. I'll pull up in just a second. Why he's able to do that, and why is it that other people, and some who I know, have been charged, or why they have been pulled off planes when they're trying to go to Russia. We're going to get into all of that. Let's get into this announcement here first from Tucker Carlson.
In the week since we left Russia, Moscow, where we are now, in February, after interviewing Vladimir Putin, we've watched from the United States as the Biden administration has driven the U.S. ever closer to a nuclear conflict with Russia, the country that possesses the world's largest nuclear arsenal. It has accelerated ever since, and it's reached its apogee so far in the weeks after Trump's election. He is now the president-elect. In that time, just a few weeks ago, the Biden administration, American military personnel, launched missiles into mainland Russia and killed at least a dozen Russian soldiers. So we are, unbeknownst to most Americans, in a hot war with Russia, an undeclared war, a war you did not vote for and that most Americans don't want, but that is ongoing. And because of that war, because of the fact that the U.S. military is killing Russians in Russia right now, we are closer to nuclear war than at any time in history, far closer than we were during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That would mean the elimination of Russia, the United States, and most of the rest of the world. We felt there must be someone behind the scenes in Washington working to make sure that this conflict doesn't become a nuclear holocaust. But we found out that no, in fact, there is nobody. Tony Blinken, the current Secretary of State, cut off all contact between the U.S. and Russian governments. There is no back channel, there is no conversation, there hasn't been for more than 2 years. That's shocking. Meanwhile, most Americans have no access to any perspective other than that granted to them by NBC News and the New York Times. They don't know how close we are. They don't know the Russian perspective. We've been trying for over a year to get that perspective out to
American news consumers.
We've also...
Pause. He's right when he says that a lot of Americans don't know that side. They don't know the other perspective. But there have been a number of independent investigative journalists that have been writing about that since the start of this war, since the start of the Ukraine war. Actually, the Gray Zone has been heavily involved in, writing about this. In particular, don't forget about Seymour Hersh's article that kind of went viral and drove some people crazy because he was telling a little too much information about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So there's been a number of independent investigative journalists that have been covering this for quite some time. However, they were not given either the access that Tucker was able to give, or they had been detained. I want to mention one in particular. So Fiorella Isabel, who works for RT, she's in Russia. She's part of Convo Couch. You guys remember Convo Couch, and she moved to Russia to work for RT. Fiorella Isabel was traveling from Russia, and I forget which country she was going to, but she was detained. If I remember correctly, I believe it was in the UK. Right. She was detained because she works for RT. She didn't interview Vladimir Putin. She didn't get that type of access, but simply because she works for RT. Kit Klarenberg has also been detained while traveling. Investigative journalist with the Gray Zone. We're thinking about a number of people that have been detained because either they went to a country that the U.S. really doesn't want you to go to, or you're covering a story they don't really want you to cover, but for whatever reason, and we'll get into that tonight, when it comes to Tucker Carlson, he is now back in Russia again and now sitting down for another interview with a Russian politician. He's not detained. Now, this is not to say that what Tucker's doing here is wrong. I think it's great to get that information out to people. More people do need to know about it. But at the same time, we always need to ask, why is it that he is able to have that mobility and to not be detained, yet you have other people over here being charged, about to be sentenced, and being detained? Let him continue.
Tried for over a year to get an interview with Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. We've attacked that from a bunch of different angles. You've spoken to a lot of different people around him, had dinner with them. We've been in talks continuously, and those efforts have been thwarted by the U.S. government. The American embassy in Kiev, which our tax dollars pay for, told the Zelensky government, no, you may not do the interview. You can talk to CNN, you can't talk to us. So we've been unable to speak to him. So we came back to Moscow yesterday to interview the foreign minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, the longest serving foreign minister in the world. He's been a part of this government for 25 years. He's been in the diplomatic corps for over 40, and ask him, where exactly are we? Are we headed toward an unprecedented conflict between Russia and the United States? Is there any way to peel Russia back from the east, from the sphere of China, back into the west? Is that alliance permanent? And does the election of Donald Trump mean an end to this war, which is reshaping the world, the U.S. economy, the global economy, and risking the life of every person on this planet? Is that possible? We just walked out of that interview. It's absolutely fascinating. It's coming very soon. We hope you'll watch.
Okay, so that was the announcement about the interview that he's going to have with the foreign minister. And I do just want to go to that for just a second. I can't play a lot of it because, you guys know how this can be. But this part here. So this is who he sat down with. I want to bring this up here on the screen. So this is the second interview that he's having in Moscow, in Russia. And I want you to listen to just this little part here first.
Minister Lavrov, thank you for doing this. Do you believe the United States and Russia are at war with each other right now?
I wouldn't say so. And in any case, this is not what we want. We would like to have normal relations with all our neighbors, of course, but generally with all countries on earth, especially with the great country like the United States. President Putin repeatedly expressed his respect for the American people, for the American history, for the American achievements in the world. And we don't see any reason why Russia and the United States cannot cooperate for the sake of the universe.
Okay, I wanted everybody to hear that because I am getting very tired of people, more so corporate media here in the US, saying that Russia wants to go to war with the United States. That is not what I've heard come from Vladimir Putin. That's not what you've heard come from the foreign minister here as well. What I have heard that has been said is that obviously they have been provoked multiple times, whether it's been by Ukraine or whether it's been by the United States, whether it's been by these coups that have been implemented, but also by the United States. They have been provoked and they have given warning multiple times that they do not want an escalation. They don't want to go to war with the United States. They don't want World War III. They really don't want those things. And at the same time, they can't just sit around and continue to be the West bully. This is why BRICS and more countries choosing to join BRICS is very important, because people are tired of being bullied by the West. And you can't really blame those countries for that. So he has this interview here. I suggest you do watch the full interview. It's on his Twitter page, but I had to let you hear that part because I thought that part was very important. Now, I want to show you something else, because let me get this lined up here. Katie Halper just recently interviewed Chairman Omali Yeshitela again. Now, Tucker Carlson interviewed Omali Yeshitela. I've interviewed Omali Yeshitela. He's been on a number of shows. Omali Yeshitela right now, this month, is scheduled to be sentenced to prison for at least, I think it's 5 years, from what I understand. They're accusing him and the Huru Three of conspiring with Russia, right? Now, again, Omali Yeshitela never sat down to interview Vladimir Putin, right? He's definitely not back over there again. From what I understand, when I interviewed them, they were in Russia one time for an event, for a conference, just like Scott Ritter has been there for an event, for a conference, not to meet one-on-one with Vladimir Putin. But listen to what is about to happen to him. And this is why I said you have to start asking questions. Listen to this.
One of, I think, the most offensive claims in the case against you is that you were kind of a pawn of the Russians. They suggest that your ideology isn't an ideology that you have. For instance, your opposition to the proxy war in Ukraine, it's not because you have a very strong record of criticizing NATO, criticizing interventionism, criticizing Western interventionism. It's because you're some Russian controlled dupe. So can you speak to that? I mean, how long have you had these ideas that you have that they are accusing you of doing at the behest of, sharing at the behest of Russia?
I think it's important that you mentioned Sami Al-Arian and his daughter, because we organized the largest anti-war mobilization after the 9/11 that happened in the Southeast. We had mobilization at MacDill Air Force Base, where much of this effort was headquartered. Our history has been one of opposition to these horrible wars. We were against Vietnam. We were against the attacks that were made on Cuba. I was in Nicaragua shortly after independence. That was there. So historically, we have been opposed to this, and they know it. And the fact is, they got all the documentation that shows it. And one of our lawyers asked the lead FBI agent, is being opposed to the war un-American? Said no. Was that, like some offense? No. Is working to expose genocide against Black people, which they said the Russians inspired as well? No. And so this is the kind of thing that happened. So that's why it was impossible for them to convict us for being under the direction and control of Russia, a foreign government. But what they did was they convicted us of conspiring to do something that never happened, to conspiring to be under the direction and control of the Russian government, and which is extraordinary because that's a thought crime. It's mean that they didn't have to do anything. I had to have thought that based on their interpretation of whatever it was that I said, or etc. So that
part right there is important for people to hear. So again, that's what he said. It's not that I had to do anything, but it's the thought, the idea that you thought that there could have been. So Omali Yeshitela is facing 5 years. He didn't interview Vladimir Putin, right? They came into the Huru house, guns blazing, pointing them at Chairman Omali Yeshitela, his wife, and everybody else in the Huru house. They didn't do anything wrong. Nothing wrong. He didn't even, like I said, he didn't interview Vladimir Putin. So let's start putting things together, folks, because we got to start asking some questions. Like I said before, how is it that certain people can get a pass and others are facing 5 years? Omali Yeshitela is like in his 80s. They want to send him to prison for what? For what? Because of a thought? The intent to commit conspiracy? What does that even mean? What are you talking about? How is it? How is it that Scott Ritter was pulled off a damn airplane, never even made it to Russia, and he was going there to go to a conference, which wasn't even about Vladimir Putin again, was going there to go to a conference, and he was pulled off the damn airplane? I know, I interviewed him on the show about it. Never made it there. Okay? Tara Reid went to Russia to promote her book, which she was actually having the book at that time. They were printing it in multiple languages. She went to Russia to promote her book, was told by Matt Gaetz not to come back to the US or she would be detained. But Tucker Carlson can go to Moscow, can go to Russia twice now and sit down and interview Vladimir Putin and now sit down and interview the foreign minister. Now, this is not to say he didn't receive threats. There were people that made threats towards him. Yeah, but the point that I'm trying to make is he wasn't detained. He's not facing any time. Now, Ben Norton pulled this out, and I think people need to pay attention to this. This is why he might be able to get a pass. It says, after college, Tucker Carlson admitted to applying to join the CIA. We know about that, but it's more than that. Tucker's father, Dick Carlson, ran U.S. state media propaganda outlet Voice of America, which coordinates closely with U.S. intelligence agencies. Now, I want to be very clear about this. You can't help who your parents are. You can't help what your parents have done for a living. But what this shows you, though, is that because of what his dad did, because of who his dad was, he's not facing the same type of heat that Tara Reid and Scott Ritter and Omali Yeshitela and others have faced. Even with Fiorella Isabel, who also was detained. Kit Clarenberg, who also was detained. He's not going to face that same type of heat. So when you have an in, you see what I mean? They're less likely to come after him. They're less likely to charge him because he had that affiliation there. So his dad was tied to U.S. intelligence agencies. What I'm saying is that he's protected. I think it's great that he's getting the other side out, but I don't want people to be mistaken. I don't want you to sit here and think that you can just hop on a damn plane and just go to Russia and say, oh, I'm just going to go interview all these people and and face no repercussions. Because some are protected and some are not. Here's another one. If we get to here, this is something else that he also mentioned that I think is also important. Now, Ben's really pretty good on foreign policy. Ben Norton said this: Tucker Carlson's role in the U.S. political system, aside from recruiting for the GOP, is to disrupt the anti-war movement and co-opt people who oppose the proxy war with Russia and Ukraine, instead pushing for war on China. So in his interview with Putin, he absurdly portrayed China as the new colonial power, ridiculously claiming it violates the sovereignty of other BRICS members. Listen to this. I want you to hear this part here where he brought that up in the interview with Vladimir Putin.
The question is what comes next, and maybe you trade one colonial power for another much less sentimental and forgiving colonial power. I mean, is the BRICS, for example, in danger of being completely dominated by the Chinese economy in a way that's not good for their sovereignty? Do you worry about that?
Well, we have heard those boogeyman stories before. It is a boogeyman story. We're neighbors with China. You cannot choose neighbors just as you cannot choose close relatives. We share a border of 1,000 kilometers with them. This is number one. Second, we have a centuries-long history of coexistence. We're used to it. Third, China's foreign policy philosophy is not aggressive. Its idea is to always look for compromise, and we can see that. The next point is as follows. We are always told the same boogeyman story, and here it goes again. Through an euphemistic form, but it is still the same boogeyman story. The cooperation with China keeps increasing. The pace at which China's cooperation with Europe is growing is higher and greater than that of the growth of Chinese-Russian cooperation. Ask Europeans, aren't they afraid? They might be, I don't know. But they are still trying to access China's market at all costs, especially now that they are facing economic problems.
So it's trading one boogeyman for another one. So while Tucker Carlson may be good when it comes to the war in Ukraine, he may be good on that issue. And he may be good with understanding, okay, Russia is not this big bad boogeyman and we need to, search for peace and pursue peace. But instead of pointing the finger at Russia, he still points the finger at China. So you're trading one boogeyman for the other one. This is similar for Tulsi Gabbard as well. People need to call this out. Tulsi Gabbard is really good at, fighting for and advocating for peace with Russia and Ukraine and not escalating things to World War III. And she also said, Russia was provoked, that type of thing. But when you mention the country China, her position changes. She also talks about China like it's a boogeyman. These people like Tulsi Gabbard and Tucker Carlson, the reason why they're still able to remain in these relative status quo circles as they are right now and still have somewhat of a slight anti-war, stance, and we kind of need peace, is because they still support a boogeyman theory. And that is with China. So they may not back that Russia is a boogeyman, but they do still support this idea of like, we should be afraid of China. So as long as you are still pointing the finger at someone else instead of the US hegemony, then that means that you will still be accepted into the status quo. That means that people like Tucker Carlson can still go into certain spaces that independent investigative journalists will not be allowed to, because they're pushing back against all of that rhetoric. They're pushing back against that boogeyman rhetoric, regardless of who the country is. So you have to pay attention to these types of things, guys. We cannot allow ourselves to fall for that. Again, we appreciate the work that is done when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. And Roger Meadows has told me this before. Roger Meadows had made it very clear to me. You got to take the good and leave the bad. So the good that you can take from Tucker Carlson, you can accept from him, is getting that other perspective when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, is getting the message out and letting people know, listen, Russia does not want World War III. They don't want war with the United States. That's the good. Take the good, leave the bad. The bad is that China is the boogeyman. No, we don't want that. We don't want that because there is no boogeyman. Okay, stop it. None of these other countries are boogeymen. You know who the problem is? It's us. We're the ones that police the world. We're the ones that steal resources from most of these countries. We're the ones that have taken over people's land. We're the ones that have removed leaders from countries, even had them taken out and installing the people that we want to lead that country because it fits our best interests. That's the real problem. Now, Tucker Carlson isn't going to go down that road. And that's the point I want you to hear. You will never hear Tucker Carlson and Tulsi Gabbard go down the lane that I just took you down. Once they start to do that, they won't be accepted into those establishment circles. So whether it's advocating for going to war with China or stopping China or advocating for Israel being able to take over the land, they make sure that they're still able to be a part of that status quo by holding on to some of that U.S. dominance, whether it's Israel or whether it's China. Tucker Carlson also, if you bring up Israel, his opinion changes. His position changes. I notice with a lot of these conversations that he has with people, they're willing to bring up Russia and Ukraine. But the moment that Israel's brought up, it's kind of just brushed off, or they don't bring it up at all. This is not to say that Tucker Carlson is like this evil person, but he is not perfect. And you cannot sit up there and continue to simp for someone just because they're right on one particular issue. So these are the types of things that we need to pay attention to. And we really need to let ourselves know as well that there comes a time where people are able to get by with certain things and others are not. And if you look by and you see the majority of these people who are trying to do the same type of thing that Tucker Carlson is doing, or they're just being detained left and right and they haven't even gotten there, like Scott Ritter being pulled off an airplane, but you see he is now in Moscow again for the second time. And you follow the line and you see that he does have those connections to those agencies. That explains it and that makes sense. So you can't be fooled. And this is not, I know some people might be like, but I like him on this issue. You can still like him on that issue. That's what I'm telling you. However, just because he's good on that issue, let's not sit up here and pretend like everybody else is going to be able to do what he's doing. They're not. I'm willing to bet you on this one. If any of those guys, or ladies from the gray zone tried to do this interview, hold on, let me pull this up here. Like if Anya tried to do this interview or Wyatt Reed tried to do this interview they would have been detained. He gets a pass. And that's what I want you to see. So yes, we're grateful that Tucker Carlson gave the Uhuru 3, a voice, but he wasn't the first. People on the left were interviewing Omali Yeshitela before he was on Tucker Carlson's show and before he was, brought up on Fox News when Tucker was still with Fox News. So it's great that he gave them a voice and it's great that he's getting the information out. However, let's not go down this road of, oh, this person is a savior and because you need to ask yourself how they're still able to maintain their position in the status quo while doing what they're doing. There's usually a connection there. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.